I'm privileged to be an observer, to spend time with these spectacular birds, and I feel I have a responsibility to share what I've come to understand and appreciate about these birds, and take that knowledge back and use the images as windows into a world that most people will never see. That means spending time with animals, up close, and the more time I can spend, the more I understand about these animals' lives, and the more intimate the relationship becomes. And it's really no different from the way a photographer who focuses his camera on people operates. It's all about building a relationship and having empathy for your subject and understanding your subject. And ultimately, you need to be able to be like a fly on the wall. You need to be able to be transparent. And I like to slowly ease my way into situations until the albatrosses don't pay any attention to anymore. They're too busy with one another. I try to put myself in the position of the animals that I'm working with. And that means that I adopt another perspective. And when I'm an albatross sitting on a nest and I'm approached by a large mammal that stands 5 feet tall, I would be concerned. So instead, I try to make myself small. I crawl around them. I move very slowly. I don't flail my arms, and I give them time to get used to my presence. And without speaking to that bird, I can indicate that that bird shouldn't have to worry about me because, I'm respectful. I've always been interested in photographs. I've looked at pictures in the National Geographic since I was a boy growing up in Holland. But the idea that I could become a photographer myself didn't occur to me until I was in my 20s. And at the time, there were not so many role models, so I taught myself photography. I never went to school. I also trained myself to become a naturalist. I don't have any background in biology, so I'm self-taught. But even today, it is very hard to point to a course at a university or in any other school where you can go to study how to become a natural history photographer. It is really all about doing it in the field. Sometimes I work alone, but more often I do the field work with my wife and partner, Christine Ekstrom, who's a former staff writer at National Geographic. And now she mixes up her field work between writing and capturing images with video cameras. So we are an unusual team in the field, but we also work with biologists quite often. We work with people involved in conservation projects. We work with people who know situations very well on the basis of living in a certain place for very long. So it can be a very simple process of me sitting in front of one albatross, or it can become a very complex situation. You don't find albatrosses near 5-star hotels. And so the conditions in the field can be pretty rough. But whatever it takes, I do. And I spent a lot of time camping out in tents on windswept, lonely islands. And for this albatross project, I even ended up spending time in a shipping container. That was the only shelter that existed on that island that enabled me to stay close to the albatrosses. When I was in my early 20s, I came to the United States and I hiked around and I discovered the phenomenal beauty and the wilderness of the western United States, and that was a real eye-opener to me. And I also discovered photography as it had become a tradition in the United States. The great wilderness photographers, Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, and Win Bullock and Philip Hyde and quite a number of others. And in Europe we did not have such a tradition, and that is when I realized that there was an artistic tradition that I could perhaps become part of. I'm inspired by how artists in the deserts of Australia have come to portray landscapes, and I've also been inspired over the years by how painters and poets in China and Japan have portrayed the world. Or I look at the way European wilderness and wildlife painters deal with their subjects on canvas. All of those different points of view have inspired me over the years, and sometimes they're implicit in my images, and other times they are actually resulting in images that have a very clear affinity with a particular artistic or cultural tradition. I try to tell stories about the natural world using sequences of images, and at National Geographic we know how to do that. There's a tradition that spans more than a century, and the editors at the National Geographic have worked with so many photographers and so many subjects over the years that a unique tradition of working with photographs for the sake of telling stories about the world has been nurtured here, and I've become part of that tradition. And after all these assignments that I've done for the magazine, I've internalized that process, and now when I go out I don't have to think about it much anymore. It's just becoming second nature to me. What many people don't realize is how much work and expertise goes into producing these photo stories and covering a subject for the National Geographic. They think that I have the greatest job in the world, which indeed I have, but they think that all you have to do is show up with a camera when the sun is going down and you make some pictures and that's it. There's a huge amount of work involved in researching a subject and then planning the expeditions and then developing relationships with people on location and understanding that there's a whole socio-economic and cultural context, that there are always environmental issues which cry out to be covered and made part of a coverage. So it's very complex, and at the end of an assignment like this albatross project, I know as much as anybody about it, and so I'm not just a photographer. I need to be able to converse about the subject. I become the storyteller, and I become an ambassador for albatrosses.